I'm sure you'll agree that helicopter bosses are among the most annoying video game phenomenons of all time, yet developers keep adding them to their games. But why? When I first started researching this question, I couldn't prepare myself for the answer. So stick around because I'm the games guru, and this is the story of how helicopters became guardians of the gaming industry. Since the dawn of time, humans have been driven by three fundamental desires: to twirl, to engage in combat, and to ascend into heavens like Kanye West. These aspirations were realized in the concept of the helicopter, which originated as a simple toy made of feathers for Chinese children in the 12th century. This design was later refined by the Italian Renaissance master Leonardo da Vinci, who conceptualized the first comprehensive design of a flying helicopter, though only on paper. The first functional copter didn't emerge until 1907, but it wasn't until after World War II that they gained popularity. Given their superior mobility and cost-effectiveness compared to fixed-wing aircraft, helicopters quickly became a mainstay in the aviation industry, attracting the attention of arms manufacturers. The heli's high maneuverability and simple design made it an ideal candidate for weaponization. And with the Cold War in full swing, global militaries swiftly began equipping helicopters with machine guns and rocket launchers. During the Vietnam War, armed choppers proved so effective that their production was ramped up, making each subsequent model increasingly dangerous, with Soviet Mi-24 standing as the most formidable of them all. Helicopters eventually made their way into Hollywood and found their first quality implementation in Rambo 2, where director George Cosmatos depicted the Soviet war machine in its most terrifying form. Around the same time, the video game industry was transitioning from arcades to home consoles, leading to increased competition among developers. Given the two-dimensional constraints of mid-80s game design, flying enemies became a necessity as they could be positioned anywhere on the screen, not just on the ground or platforms. In 1987, Acclaim Entertainment released a video game adaptation of Rambo 2, which, much like its predecessor, was the first quality implementation of helicopters in the industry, despite the rest of the game being, to put it mildly, strange. In this video game, John Rambo, in bright red leggings, was combating insects, snakes, flamingos, and whatever that is. But in the end, you were to fight a colossal Mi-24 that showers a relentless barrage of missiles while casually flying around. This helicopter boss made such a profound impact on players that the developers decided to incorporate more heli bosses in the sequel. This included a single helicopter boss, a double helicopter boss, a helicopter plus tank boss, and a lone tank with the spirit of a helicopter. These bosses were easy to design, and since they were the last hurdle between the player and the end screen, it didn't really matter if the player decided to quit the game at that point. As a result, an increasing number of developers began incorporating helicopters as final bosses in their games, even though the concept was still somewhat blurry and flawed. So, while the concept of the helicopter was conceived by the Chinese, designed by the Italians, perfected by the Russians, and popularized by the Americans, it was another nation, the Japanese, that was responsible for their gamification. Ironically, in the same year with Rambo, the very first Metal Gear game debuted, featuring its own helicopter boss fight. Surprisingly, the heli boss in Rambo was better, as the one in Metal Gear didn't even try to move, lazily shooting at you with its machine gun. Players quickly realized that the machine gun had several blind spots, allowing them to spam grenades from there. However, in the next Metal Gear, the one that's solid, Hideo Kojima reflected on his past mistakes and created the most badass helicopter boss of its time. Imagine this. You are a secret agent infiltrating an enemy base. Your goal is to reach the top of a tower, maintaining stealthy appearance as much as possible. You avoid everyone, trying with all your might to stay hidden when suddenly, boss ambushes you, mocking you and forcing you into a battle. Die! But once the fight starts, you quickly realize what a lame enemy you're fighting, as all you have to do is run around a box and launch homing missiles. At this point, helicopter bosses became one of the most controversial elements in the gaming industry. On one hand, they were a fascinating design choice that both gamers and developers enjoyed. But on the other hand, no one yet managed to create a truly engaging helicopter boss. This led to the industry tabooing heli-bosses, and games featuring them to be often dismissed as low quality. That's why you might not remember the final bosses of GTA 3 and Vice City Stories. Realizing they were helicopters would lower your opinion of these otherwise great games. Helicopter bosses became a standard cliché, disliked by many. Yet their potential was so vast and the creative costs so little that developers didn't want to abandon them entirely, leading to experimentation. They were downgraded from bosses to regular enemies or transport, but they were still annoying. Remember the construction mission in GTA Vice City? Even though you are the one who controls the helicopter, everyone will agree that that mission is actually a boss fight. Then, Half-Life 2 featured one of the best helicopter boss fights in gaming history, though ironically, both of them originated as coding bugs, and it will be a long time until someone manages to copy their success. Meanwhile, flight simulators like Comanche allowed gamers to take a role of a heli-boss, raining down missiles and annoyance on their enemies. Later, helicopters found new roles as story elements in single-player games, transporting players to and from missions, providing platforms for emergency briefings, showcasing nuclear explosions, or epically crashing onto the battlefield. By 2010, game developers stopped using helicopters as bosses almost entirely, replacing them with airplanes, which proved ineffective. While copters could hover at one place, airplanes had to stay in constant motion, requiring large skyboxes and complex balancing for gameplay mechanics. Thankfully, during the PS3 era, developers realized their predecessors' mistakes and started creating helicopter bosses again. This time, they made them not just annoying, but also fairly challenging and rewarding for players. Unfortunately, as is often the case with many successful features, developers began using helicopter bosses indiscriminately, forgetting what made them awesome in the first place. A good example is an uninspired heli-bosses like the one in Marvel's Avengers, which did nothing but float and pose as a platform. However, hope remained, as many indie developers started incorporating helicopter bosses into their games, often doing it better than most of the AAA studios. Meanwhile, multiplayer FPS developers like DICE allowed the players to naturally become a heli-boss themselves and experience the rage and satisfaction they once evoked in other games. These examples show that the issue isn't with helicopters themselves, but with the developers creating them. Let's make heli-bosses better, make them menacing, engaging, and filled with perfect sarcasm. As for me, I now see a helicopter boss as a personal nemesis, pursuing me from game to game, constantly asking for a rematch. Thank you all for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more documentaries about the gaming industry, and check out this video that the YouTube algorithm thinks you might like. I'm the Games Guru, love to all, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye!